Hi, everyone. America has always been a country of change. And no matter what time you look at, things are happening to make this country an even better place to live in. A lot of these changes involve social change. Some of them are more social than others, but we'll get to that later. But I want you to pay attention to a couple of social changes, or I'm going to call them social reforms, that really did impact this country, say from the time around 1800 to 1850, just before we entered the Civil War. Now you have to remember, we were a country that was growing, and we were starting to see we were feeling a little bit of the effects of the Industrial Revolution. It would still be a few years before it had its full impact, but we were feeling it. Factories were starting, and we were building new things, which was great. But that type of change put a demand on our country to be even better. How? Well, the one way you're going to be better is through education. Well, in the very beginning, or at least for the first 70 years or so, 40 or 50 years, ours was a basic education. Private, those who had money got it done. Most people weren't so wealthy, like Horace Mann. Horace Mann was born in Massachusetts. His father was a farmer, and unfortunately, his father was not very wealthy. So as a result, Horace was stuck with the traditional maybe 6 to 10 weeks of schooling that he got, and then the farm it was, working the farm, making it move, getting it done. He was successful. He was able to get education. He went to the library. He was so interested in learning. He went to the library as much as he could. He got himself into college and eventually became a legislator. But here's the thing. He knew there needed to be change, because in the old days, let's say old days, prior to 1840, most schools were done, if there was any schooling, it was private or tutored by the wealthy. If there was a school, it was probably about 60 kids, all in one house, all in one room. And the school teacher was poorly educated, poorly trained, and poor, period. Not much money. So Mann had an idea. He said, why not pay for schooling with tax money? And why not make a curriculum so the kids can actually learn something fresh and new and really gain an education? And what about paying teachers a decent salary? What a concept. And that is what he instituted. Horace Mann is considered the father of education, modern education, because he was able to put those into place. So that by around 1840, 1845, 1850, young people were able to go to school to tax paid for by the public. Public paid for taxes. Public taxes going to schools. Paid for by public taxes. I hope I'm saying that right. Anyway, the curriculum was formed to make sure they were really getting a solid education. And students were required to go to school. Oh yeah, that came in about that time. So public education started between the 1830s and 1850s, all because Horace Mann saw a need, a real need, to put this nation into a world that was also being educated. What a concept. And what a reform. But see, Horace Mann wasn't the only reformer, though. We've got a lady named Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman was a wonderful African-American woman who was a slave, born to a slave family in the South, of course, and her original name was Armenter, but she changed it when she got married. But here was a trick behind Harriet Tubman's heart and success. When she escaped, she brought her two brothers with her. And she realized, you know what? There are other people back there who need to escape too. So she went back to help others escape. You see, there was something called the Underground Railroad. It was a term used for that network of homes, schools, churches, where slaves could be guided to these places of safety and work their way out from places like Kentucky, Virginia, and Maryland, up to places like Pennsylvania, New England, Ohio, Indiana. That railroad, quote, quote, gave the opportunity for slaves to get freedom years before the Emancipation Proclamation. You see, each one of these churches were like a station or a depot. They called them stations, depots, safe houses. Now, the person who was at these stations or depots or safe houses was called the station master. The person who guided those folks from one place to another was called the conductor. Sounds elaborate, and in some ways it was, because it was very quiet, very carefully done. It was known but not known. And you know what? It was a big success. It lasted for decades and brought a countless number of people from slavery into freedom up north. What a concept. The Underground Railroad, part of the abolition movement. Then there was something else we could talk about. It's not really a movement in itself, but it's kind of a change in the way people do things. It's called the arts. And I'm going to refer to two people in particular, John Audubon and Edgar Allan Poe. Why those two? Well, John Audubon became very famous for his pictures of birds. And you see, he was a naturalist. He loved the outdoors. And birds represented beauty and freedom and a free spirit. And he loved to make those kind of pictures. He made a collection that's now in one of his museums up north. Now, that was naturalism. You see, what did naturalism come from? Well, just like Edgar Allan Poe, it was an escape. As I told you, America was growing, America was changing, and Americans needed an escape. Who better to escape with than either a Audubon or a Poe? Edgar Allan Poe had a dark concept of life, almost eerie. His very famous poem, The Raven, was all about him staring at this bird that was on a mantelpiece and writing about a bird that would say to him, nevermore. That was just one of his multitude works. But you see, Poe was trying to express a deep frustration with what was seen as a change in America to a more industrial country, leaving the rural, the small town behind. Well, it wasn't quite there yet. We were only like 5 to 10% industrial. But Edgar Allan Poe was worried that we were changing too rapidly. And so his writings were an escape, just like Audubon's were an escape. They may not have been an actual reform, but they were something for people to turn to. We've got the public education, we got the Underground Railroad, and we got art. We've also talked about, of course, by the way, the Underground Railroad has to do with the abolition movement. We have talked about the temperance movement and the women's movement. Those are other reform movements that have been part of this time also. You see, America was changing. We were about to hit the Civil War. And while we were doing that, we had experienced this kind of change already. We are an amazing country. We've always been. We always will. See you later.